Well, welcome everyone to the 27th Degree with Chris and Nancy, brought to you by 27 Degrees Consulting. On this podcast, we discuss common problems and best solutions. And today we're honored to have Dr. Ferreira from Diamond Regional High School. Dr. Ferreira is the superintendent of Diamond Regional. And we're going to talk a little bit about reopening the school and the plan that's in place, as this seems to be a topic of interest to many of our listeners. So maybe we can just start with the plan.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me here this morning. Greater Fall River and Diamond Regional's reopening plan, voted by our school committee, is a phased hybrid. We're going to be looking to start on September the 16th for our students. Our staff will be in starting September 1st through the 15th for professional training and some educational pieces that have to go to the staff. So our plan initially right now has students starting on the vocational side, specific grade levels during specific days and weeks. The thought process is with transportation issues and safety and health concerns that we're going to have as few people in the building as possible to start, 25% of our student population at first. And then as the situation progresses, we will analyze bi-monthly to try to get to 50%, 75%, and eventually 100% in person at some point, again, depending on health and safety situations.
Great.
You know, I have to commend you on one thing, too. When I was doing my research for the podcast, I had looked at your website. You have some great resources for anyone that really wants to dig down into those little details to read about and to really look. And what's great about that, too, is you have those scenarios, like the what-if scenarios. What if this happens? What if that happens? What are we doing here? It's like a very, very comprehensive plan. I was pretty impressed.
Well, it was important for us to communicate as much as possible, knowing the scenarios with the staff, with parents, with students. The worst part for us is the unknown, getting a phone call or being communicated with and having somebody ask a question that we didn't think about. Or that we didn't plan for. There are always going to be those scenarios. We know that it's on the fly. And again, as our principal likes to say, you're flying the plane as you're building it in that
Right.
kind of light.
In midair.
Exactly. But the state has done a very good job, very thorough with all of their agencies, pushing information out to the school districts. The commissioner, we speak with him at least once a week, sometimes several times a week as things progress. And the information that we have, we felt it was important to get out to folks so that they have it. Not everybody is in tune with the Department of Education or with public health and reading the guidelines that come out. So we felt it was critically important to the students and the parents, the community members of Diamond Regional to make that as accessible as possible through our COVID page.
That's great.
So let's back up a little bit, because I'm really curious about the conversations that happened. So here we are mid-March, right? It's everything's closing down. And then, the school, you're figuring out that we're not going to have school till the end of the year. What's the conversation like over the summer? Now, you're hearing things from all sides, teachers' concerns, parents' concerns. You're listening to all the different data around the kids that's out there and can be confusing. So what were those conversations? Kind of take us through what those conversations were like over the summer to finally get you to this final decision.
Well, we started by getting as many different participants and stakeholders involved as possible. So we put out communications and surveys to our parents, to our staff, for looking for folks who would be interested in partaking in the committees that we set up. And then we had weekly meetings for 6 weeks to develop all three components of the plan, because the state did require us to have an in-person attempt, a hybrid attempt, and then a remote attempt. Regardless of our feelings, we had to provide, every district had to provide all three options to the state. And then it's a final plan based on the data and the safety numbers that were in place. So we had approximately 30 people in our committee, and we broke off into 3 groups. We felt it was more advantageous to have small groups focus and concentrate on areas of interest versus trying to have 30 people come up with all the different plans. So
Right.
We had a group do the in-person, and they went deep into everything that was part of that plan. We had a group do the hybrid, which was the more complex plan. We had a group do the remote, which wasn't as complicated because we had done so much remote in the spring.
Right.
There were significant changes, and the state requirement is very, very different for the fall than it was in the spring, as far as synchronous teaching, live teaching, what the students are doing, what the staff is doing, all those different components. It's very, very different for the fall. Each one of those groups from our committee then would come back to the large group. We would analyze everything as far as the details of what was going to come out. Great ideas were floated, and things really had to be fine-tuned because not everybody understands the financial aspect of it, the legal
Yes.
aspect of it, the HR aspect of it. There are so many different layers that come in. You come up with a great idea and you think this is it, this is going to go, and
Right.
then you slowly start to fold in the other responsibilities that come in at the district level, at the state level, and you quickly start to see, okay, our plan wasn't as great or wasn't as tight knitted as it needed to be. But again, over the course of those 6 weeks in developing all the different layers with the committee and then working with the administrators to kind of fine tune everything out, it led us to our understanding. We are a vocational school. We are a hands-on program. Students decide to come to Diamond Regional because they are interested in project-based learning. It's not sit behind a desk 180 days. So we
Right.
felt very strongly that we had to somehow build in layers where our students were getting that component of their education, which can't be done remotely.
Right.
They're just as great as our teachers and our students were in the spring. There was at least a foundation because they had been in person from September through March.
Right.
Right.
So there was a lot
Right.
that they could build on and do
Sure.
remotely. That is not the case moving into September. The students have been promoted to a new grade level. There are components and curricula pieces that they have not been introduced to. Trying to do that remotely, it was just
Challenge.
It's a
it
challenge.
was not doable for us.
I just want to remind anyone who is listening to the podcast, if you do have questions, you can post them on Facebook and we will respond to those questions. What I'd like to ask you, Dr. Ferreira, if you could just walk through a typical day for a student who's going to now be walking in through the doors this year, what will they experience from the point they hit the door to the end of the day?
So based on the guidelines that have come out from the Department of Education and from the state, first contact will be with an administrator, and we have to have hand sanitizing and hand hygiene stations put in. So I guess backing up one step to that is the whole bus and transportation aspect as well, because there have been
I was
there's
wondering
been,
about that.
clear guidance to the transportation companies. We don't own our own fleet. We have contracted with a company. And they have to do modifications. So they have to have monitors on the buses who are ensuring compliance with the students, because every student has to wear a mask. No one can be within 3 feet unless you're a sibling or a same household. They have to have hand hygiene scenarios as the kids come on the bus. There are questions and safeguards that the companies will have to identify and communicate with as kids are coming on the bus, parents are at the bus stops. So that's unique and different. For us, we normally have bus capacities in the 50s, 60s, depending on the route. We're looking at 20 to 25 now. So that played a large role as far as our plan and coming up with something that was practical, because we did communicate with several companies looking to see if there were additional drivers, additional buses, different routes we could take. And the answers generally were no. They don't have the staff, they don't have the vehicles to devote to us if we were looking to expand, and there's a cost associated with that as well.
Right.
The state and the federal government have been really good with the grants that they've put out to assist, but those are finite, and knowing the cost of transportation, 1 + 1 didn't always equal 2 in those scenarios. So as students get on campus, we will have a main focus where students are going to come in, whether they're being dropped off by parents or they're coming off the buses. Again, we'll do the hygiene scenarios. We do have a plan. We're not utilizing our cafeteria because we can't guarantee 6 foot scenario and safe sitting situations for the students. Breakfast will be available, but it'll be in an alternate situation which has a little bit more space and room and flexibility and monitoring. We will not allow students to roam freely in the hallways under normal conditions. They come in and they have 30 minutes or so before first period where they see their friends, walk around, get some exercise. That is going to be a significant change moving forward. Once the day gets going, again, our plan is to have in-person on the vocational side. So our students will report to shops. They'll work with their instructors. Lunches will be done in the shops because, again, the cafeteria scenario is not ideal for us, and it's an overflow situation for us. We don't have a ton of space in our campus. If anybody knows what Diamond Regional is with our student population and our equipment and machinery, there isn't a lot of excess space. So gymnasium, auditorium, cafeteria, what we call common areas, are going to be utilized for several different scenarios based on what happens during the course of a day. And for dismissal, same kind of scenario. Before the kids exit the building, they're going to have to hand hygiene. As they get on the bus, they'll do that again. We will control as much as we can as far as traffic flow in the hallways. We are making our hallways one way to avoid large groups. Anyone that has to use the facilities, that's going to be controlled by the shop teachers so that they'll be going in groups and not randomly going into the bathrooms. We do have utility and custodial that will make sure all the facilities are sanitized in between. So it's a very large and very detailed plan scenario to make sure we're not creating an unsafe situation for students or for staff.
Now, normally, last year before all this happened, how many students would you have at Diamond?
On a typical day, we have somewhere between 1,000 and 1,200 students.
And now, starting out, you'll have
About 350.
350. Okay, so there'll be the ability to be quite a bit more separation, obviously.
That's the hope. And that was the idea of our phased plan was to make sure day one we were as controlled as possible in case there was an issue that came up. We would be able to contact trace appropriately. We'd be able to shut down small pockets instead of having to shut down the entire campus.
I think that's so smart because, just recently we saw the viral photo from one of the schools that opened up with all those kids in the hallway.
In Georgia.
And and I was going to ask you, how are you avoiding that type of situation? So it sounds like you have it pretty nailed down not to get to where they were.
Right. We will minimize traffic and flow as much as possible, especially knowing the phases that we're thinking about. And we are making masks mandated. They're required for all staff and all students.
Now, students should come in with their own masks, but you'll have some available as well?
Yeah, the state guidance has been, as people start to back to school shop, students should have their own masks. We will have, for anyone who has economic situations, we do have a supply. Anybody that's coming in, we do have something available for them, but again, now you start to look at it's part of the dress code, it's part of the disciplinary situation. You got to kind of pay attention to all of that. Is someone doing it just to, throw a monkey wrench in the system? But the expectations for everyone moving out is that students will be required to wear masks.
And what type of mask? Bandana's okay?
No, we're looking for, it has to have an ear loop, must cover the nose and the mouth. We're not allowing the gaiters to come up. Because the data that's
Curious.
showing
Did
us
you
is not
see the
available.
most recent data too on the gaiters
No.
that they're not effective as well because of the way it breaks down the particles? It makes them smaller.
Yeah, there was
So-
something about, as far as the gaiters that's coming up from the CDC and the neck thing, that the material that
Right.
it's not as thick as a regular
Yeah.
mask,
Thin.
so it doesn't do what a regular mask is supposed to do. We're allowing face shields if necessary, but in addition to the face mask, not in absence of a face mask. So
Sure.
we are, again, all of that stuff is in our new student handbook, which will be an addendum because
probably
when it
this
went
thick.
out to publish, that wasn't part of the regulation.
Right,
So we'll
right.
have all sorts of appendices that have to go in to the staff handbook, to the student handbook. So there are, again, changes every week that are coming out. But that will be a requirement, even in shops, that the kids are a little able to spread out a little bit because the space is superior to the academic side. We will have them utilizing the face masks when they're close, when they're at a machine, doing something with the instructors. It'll be closely monitored.
Oh, I was reading something interesting too. You have areas with face mask breaks.
Mhm.
So talk about that, because that was the kind of the first time that I had read that in a plan.
So as for us specifically, as we start to incorporate more students and we start to look very closely at the 6-foot, 3-foot scenario, we will have times where the students will be 10-ish feet apart,
Yeah.
and they'll be allowed to utilize the breaks. Again, following the guidance, as long as we can maintain 6 feet, we're in relatively good shape. Again, our shops, knowing that we're only going to have small pockets of students there, our students are going to have ample space when they're working independently, so that they will be able to take a break. No one should be around them. When they're at lunchtime, when they're on their break time with the instructors, and they start to congregate, that's where the policing of the masks will have to come in, and the students will be utilizing their face coverings more religiously.
Now, I've heard, and I think you've heard too, a lot of this, like when I listen to the news especially, they're saying that 3 feet's okay in schools. So what was your determinant, 3 feet versus 6 feet?
So the guidance that came from Massachusetts was that we should be aspiring for 6 feet, but that 3 feet was an acceptable piece.
Okay.
For Fall River, Greater Fall River and Diamond Regional specifically, we went with the line that said aspire for 6. So we really didn't play into the 3-foot rule. Our aspiration was to keep 6 feet. It was what the federal government was saying, the CDC was saying was best. So, and we knew when we did our in-person 100% plan, especially on the academic side, of Diamond Regional, we were only going to get a few more desks in a classroom if we changed between 3 and 6.
Yeah.
And again, the guidance changed almost weekly as to where you should be measuring from. And at first it was from a corner of a desk, then it was from a corner of a chair, then it was from the middle of a chair, and we understood why.
Yeah.
The big push at the beginning was in person. Try to get everybody in person back to school. Because there are so many scenarios that play out with a hybrid model or a remote model. So the commissioner and the governor were definitely trying to see what was going to work and what wasn't going to
Sure.
work. I think it didn't take a long time as everybody brought out their tape measures and readjusted their desks. And for some schools, it definitely works.
Yeah.
There are local schools where their academic space, their learning space is adequate, where you can put 20 desks and it'll work, and everybody's 3-ish to 6-ish feet apart. That just was not the case for us. Again, if you visited our campus and you've seen some of our classrooms, the school itself, when it was constructed in the 60s, was only for 600 to 800 students. And we haven't had significant changes to our academic classrooms, but our population is now at 1450 when we look at students. So on the academic side of the house, you've gone from 300 to 400 students to somewhere in the realm of 700 students on a regular basis. And we utilize every closet, every nook and cranny of our building to make an appropriate learning scenario and an appropriate learning space. But they're just, for every academic section, if we were going in person, we'd have to use 2 classrooms. And that quickly became a non-doable situation for
Sure,
us.
makes sense. Can you tell me a little bit about the experience of the student that will be learning from home?
Sure. So the scenario, the expectation is going to be that we have live synchronous education based on the guidance. So students will be following their regular schedule. So if on a Monday, they're in their academic week, it's a B day, at 7:45, they're supposed to be in math, they're going to log into their math Google Classroom. Their teacher will be there, we have to take attendance, all of those guidance scenarios are in place now. The teacher will do a combination of live, recorded, interactive, engaged learning with the students that are at home. There'll be different activities that they have to, work with and be engaged in on the student side. What we have done, and we looked at guidance from outside agencies with all the screen time, our normal academic time frame is 57-ish minutes per class. So we're going to bring that down to about 40 to 45 minutes of learning. So that way there is a window that the teachers can prepare, move on, get ready for their next classroom. The students can take a little bit of break away from their screen. They'll still be actively working. They might be on a worksheet or finishing an assignment, but they don't need to be in front of the screen. They can take a break if they need to prepare for their next transition to their next Google Classroom, so forth and so on. And that's generally how the day will work. It'll be a 7:45 start and a 2:28 finish. And all the work will be through Google or Google School. We have been now. This is, I think, our third year that we're in that scenario. But it'll be following just a regular schedule. No, big breaks throughout the day like we had in the spring. Everything will be as synchronous as possible.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, what were kind of those lessons learned to keep the kids engaged from, like, what are you doing differently from what you did in the spring to what you're doing in the fall? What were those like, oh, this really didn't work, we're going to change this up and do it this way going into the fall?
Yeah, so on the academic side, a lot of the information we received from the staff and from the students when we surveyed at the end had to do with contact and communication. When we were trying to do this all on the fly, there were scenarios where the kids were doing some review work, that they were going back to chapters where the teachers could identify weaknesses and gaps in learning from assessments that had taken place prior, and kind of take some time to fill that in. This will be very different moving forward. Everything will be fresh, everything will be new, everything will be timed. We are building in, especially if the students are on campus, some time for the academic teachers to catch up with a student. And that's the nice part about having the hybrid, is we know there will be a body in the building as far as the student side. So that if a math teacher is noticing a trend with the child remotely, they know that the kid's coming into carpentry on Monday. They can work with the carpentry teacher to say, can I have Johnny for 5 minutes because I noticed something last week or something.
Good. That's a question I had, how they would deal with those types of scenarios.
Yeah.
Now, all the teachers are going to be teaching from the classroom, not from home.
That's the expectation.
Okay.
Yeah. We have, all of our resources are in our building.
Yeah.
So part of the strategy is, with our technology and our resources, is that the most effective and productive way for the teachers to deliver the content and the curriculum is on campus. So that is our expectation at this point.
Chris, can we talk a little bit, or actually, can you talk a little bit on the kids? There's a lot of data out there now, and it might be a little confusing over, do kids get sick? Are they going to transmit? Not at all, or more likely to? We just saw those staggering numbers. 97,000 kids have tested positive in the last 2 weeks. So can you kind of talk to those fears? And it's like,
sure. So from a medical perspective, I think most people are aware that this is it's an unusual disease, first of all. So it doesn't always follow the rules, meaning that you can be healthy and can get quite ill with it. But the majority of people that get quite ill are older or have comorbidities, meaning they have heart disease or lung disease, diabetes. We hear stories about younger kids who get real sick, and the media does really focus on that, and it puts a lot of fear into people. But it's not all that common, quite honestly. Kids can have very mild disease. They can be asymptomatic carriers. It's pretty rare for a child to get terribly ill, although it does happen. Most of the deaths that we see from this disease are older people. A good majority of the deaths are actually nursing home patients. So it gives you an idea of kind of the demographics of where this disease strikes. Was there another part to your question, Nancy?
Yeah, because I'm just thinking, gosh, if my mom lives with me and she's 90, or if I have a compromised son at home, and I'm sending little Johnny to school, is he coming back with anything? Like, do I have to be nervous about that?
It's a tough question. It really is, because, realistically, anyone can be an asymptomatic carrier. I think that from what I have read, though, the chance of spreading the disease certainly increases with the level of infection. So, patients who are symptomatic or hacking and coughing, they probably have more viral load than asymptomatic patients. But I'm not sure if you want to comment a little more on that. I'm sure that's something, Dr. Furr, that you all looked at when you did your plan, but...
Yeah, so there are always those questions. I mean, I have two school-age children of my own, and eventually in our district they'll be in the building at some point and engaging with other people that are obviously outside of our family unit.
Yeah.
And then when they come home with my wife, myself, my parents are older, my in-laws are older. We see them every once in a while. So how does that dynamic change? And I think realistically there will be a change. At least for a short window of time, where right now we see people socially distant and appropriate, of course, but we see people routinely. And moving forward, there's in the back of my mind, that whole piece of, okay, what do we have to do and how long do we have to do it? And
I think we'll have to, I think things are going to change, right? This is the first time we've really done this. I mean, COVID hit and schools closed, and now kids are going back to school.
And we've all kind of been in our little bubble.
And we're
so
going to
this
have
is
to
kind of
see
like
how,
a step out of our comfort
we're going to
zone
have
a
to
little
see
bit.
how this goes. And I think we're going to get more data as time goes on. But, I have two kids who are in school. One is in college and, one's in high school. And, they'll take the precautions they have to take when they come home. I may feel differently about them being with their grandparents, for example, because they have, medical issues that would put them at higher risk. I think we just have to see how this all works out to some extent. I think there's a lot of unknowns. I wish I could give you a more definitive answer, but we've never had a group of kids going back to school before, during this pandemic. So I think we're going to learn more over the next few months. I think that there's no reason to panic. The schools will do what they can to protect the kids and reduce the risk of infection. And at home, we have to do the same to be careful too and take precautions as we must. And certainly if there's a family member that's compromised, I think it makes sense to try to have some separation.
So is that an available option? Like if you have some type of scenario going on at home that you're just like, this really doesn't make sense to send my child back to school right now at this moment. Mm-hmm. Is there that alternative option that, okay, fine, you can just learn from home, or what happens in that type of scenario?
Yes, so from the federal government and the state government, all districts have been told that there has to be a free and appropriate educational scenario for a child whose parent comes to us and says, I want my child to be at home. At this point, for X reason, remote is all they're going to do. So we have those scenarios in place. It is an option. A parent can request that a child only work remotely. That does not come in with, if it's their week to come in, they're not going to come in. They're going to do, for us, technical at home, academic at home. Those scenarios are in our plan, and they are definitely options for parents.
How do you do technical at home?
Very carefully. So
playing with their kitchen sink.
in this spring, so many of our technical teachers were extremely creative as far as what they had the students do. There were a lot of scenarios where the teachers would videotape themselves or try to do a live lesson with the intent, and then the students would be allowed to, within reason, practice at home. If the situation was appropriate, videotape themselves practicing, sending that video to the teacher, and we went kind of back and forth. Culinary arts had students prepare meals at home, videotape themselves going through the process so that the teachers could assess. But again, there was such a strong foundation because there had been 6 to 7 months of instruction, so that the kids were relatively well prepared. It would be very difficult to go through that process now because there was such a greater learning curve with the students not having the content from last year. But we did utilize the internet significantly. There was several groups on the vocational side that the district belongs to that had assessments the students could do online, that there were videos they could watch within their content area, because there are organizations that specialize in this. So we did dive into that. A little bit, not at a great extent, because again, we were up against the end of the year. And then the way it happened, we were closed for a little while, and then we were closed a little bit longer. So there was always the idea that the students are going to come back at some point. It wasn't until that final day where the governor said, nobody's coming back the rest of the way, that we kind of transitioned into our full, everything is going to happen online now, academically and technically. So there is a balance that has to happen on the technical side. Sure. And again, it's why we really considered and appreciated the fact that as a technical school, the students need to, at some point, be in the building, because it's very difficult to simulate the welding that takes place in the building at home, or or the carpentry or the electricity.
Right. This is such a unique setup and situation. It's you could do a regular school for the most part. You could do it all online if you needed to, but you really can't with this type of scenario. Right. Did you get any pushback from teachers, from family members, parents? I'm curious how this all went.
I won't necessarily say pushback. There's been open dialogue, and there still is open dialogue. There are questions, as I mentioned before, that come up every day, scenarios that we realistically did not consider the day before, the week before, that are now in front of us. So we are actively continuing our discussions with the teachers, with our clerical staff, with our custodial staff, knowing we have collective bargaining units that we have to work with. So those discussions are happening regularly, and at some point we will have to make final decisions moving into what's best for the student, because again, we're all in this particular field of education looking to do what is most appropriate and best for kids moving forward. And we'll work within the guides that are most appropriate with the Board of Health and the safety restrictions that we're in. No two individuals have the same scenario. Not from a teacher's perspective, not from an administrator's perspective, not from a parent perspective. So everything becomes very, very tricky. And we're just navigating that minefield as best we can on a daily basis.
So talking about the teachers and everything, like with the circumstances you have to work with now, did that require more staffing, and how do you deal with that, if that's in fact the case?
So part of our plan as we transition back towards full in person will require us to adopt some sort of additional staff. It may not be teachers per se, but if we have to have students 3 to 6 feet apart, and we do have to utilize 2 classrooms for every academic session, well, the teacher can only be in one of those 2 classrooms. So we would have to have a monitor or a paraprofessional or someone to assist to make sure what's going on in classroom A is appropriate while teachers in classroom B. So that scenario does have us looking at additional staffing as far as education, as far as security, as far as hallway monitoring, clerical, all, as folks decide, or there are circumstances where someone physically can't be in the building based on health or whatever the case may be. Our clerical pool has to expand, our substitute pool has to expand, because the education still has to happen. And those are scenarios and pitfalls that we don't know right now. Can I find a substitute who is adept enough at technical learning, at online learning, and they're going to teach math at the same time? So those are all different areas that, again, time will bring, and we'll actively engage and work with to make sure what we're doing is appropriate for everyone.
Now, if parents are available to volunteer some time, is that an opportunity that you have?
We have parent volunteers already. There are certain circumstances. There is a protocol that they have to go through, Corey testing and different things like that. In this particular scenario, we are shying away only because we are trying to minimize the number of folks in the building at one time.
Sense.
Even our outside guests, if we have meetings, which we do, parent meetings, discipline meetings, health meetings, special education meetings, we are trying to, outside visitors, really trying to navigate those waters carefully so that we don't have an influx. We know, again, we're trying to control our bubbles, like the NBA, right?
Sure.
We're trying to control our bubble as best we can. And the more outsiders, vendors, anybody that comes into the bubble, we have to monitor, sanitize, isolate. So there are different plans and steps that we have connected to those things. But there are always scenarios where we know we're going to have outsiders come in.
All right, so we have a question from Jamie for you, Dr. Ferreira. Has it been determined what 350 students will be going back?
Yes, I spoke with the principal this morning, and Mr. Rebello and the administrators are working on an exact scenario that's going to come out. That information is going to go live to parents in a PowerPoint through social media and through our website either today or Monday.
Perfect.
And then we'll do a phone blast and an email blast so parents are aware and that they can go in and look at when their son or daughter is going to be physically in the building.
Nice.
Student schedules are still being finalized, so I do want to stress that we make changes to student schedules literally till the day before school starts. And
Yeah.
now with September 16, there's a little bit bigger window. So it is possible that a parent could find out that their child is supposed to be physically on campus the first week of shop, and then they find out, well, no, later on because of schedule changes that it actually has to be the second week of shop because something happened on the academic side. So
Right.
we just ask everyone to be as patient as possible. We do have a plan. We think it'll work. And all that information will come out progressively over the next 4 weeks.
Can I ask you, so we've talked about a lot of details as far as distancing, hand hygiene, mask wearing, the crowded hallway scenario and what you're doing to avoid that. What about cleaning the school? Like, what's the frequency and how are you doing that?
So we've initiated from March a deep clean scenario and a routine that our custodians utilize both during the day and at night. So we have 2 different shifts, one when the students are there and one when the students are not. We work with several of our vendors to make sure the products we're using are most appropriate
Yeah.
and most safe for all of the individuals that will be in the building. We have purchased equipment that will allow us to do deep cleaning in areas that need to be deep cleaned. All the staff, the custodial and the utility staff, while we had the school closures, we had them do professional development so that they know exactly what they have to do, when they have to do it, proper solution mixing, so forth and so on. And again, we have spent quite a bit of resources updating our equipment so that the custodians can do what they need to do to make sure that the spaces are as safe as possible for students and for staff.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of break out into kind of 3 categories. We'll do parents, teachers, and the kids going back. What was one of the greatest challenges and conversations with the parents? Like, what kept on coming up that you're like, we really have to nail this so we get that comfort level with the parents? And can you kind of talk through that conversation? What, like, probably the number one concern was?
Well, there probably was a 1A and a 1B. Safety was always
Sure.
number one. Parents wanted to know what we were doing to make sure while the students were with us that they were as safe as possible. So that was always a hot topic. The second one realistically was getting the kids in as much as possible. Again, knowing the specialty of our school and what we do, it was important to parents and for students to be physically in the building at some point. So those were really the 2 topics that continuously came up with parents and with students.
Now, what about with teachers?
The teaching staff really has a lot of scenarios and questions, again, around safety. How safe can we keep the teachers in the scenario where students are now being introduced and we're outside of that remote scenario? So we looked at all the shops, knowing that our first phase was having kids in shops to identify teacher spaces where the teachers could actively be by themselves, distant from everybody. We looked at technology to ensure that everything was available and appropriate for the teachers to deliver content if they had to do it remotely. We looked at sanitation PPE to make sure the shops are well stocked, the academic side is well stocked. We have put in hand hygiene and sanitizing pumps in every corner of the building to make sure as someone exits a room to go to the bathroom, whatever the case may be, being called down to an office, wash your hand, touch the handle, open the door, wash your hand, go out, come back in, open the door, wash your hand, close the door, wash. So all of those routines, are going to be emphasized with teachers and with students.
Good.
And a lot of it, I don't want to say goes against what we've been learning for the last few years as far as school safety and such, but now so many recommendations are don't close classroom doors, where before it was close classroom doors, unlock classroom doors in case somebody gets into the school.
Right.
So there's been such a different wave of information that's come out. And again, we've been flexible. We've been told by the commissioner and the governor to be as nimble as possible. So we're attempting to do that because,
word.
well, again, week to week, day to day, as the data becomes available and information comes out, there are changes. There are
Yeah,
changes
sure.
that we have to make. You know, before Wednesday, we didn't know about the colored maps. Now we know about the colored maps and what the expectations are if regions and municipalities change from yellow to red or green to yellow or unshaded to yellow. So there are so many different layers that just within the past 2 days have been introduced. And at a time where the plans for the 500 and some odd districts that are submitting information to the state were basically complete. And now a lot of people had to go back and say, well, you know, as of Tuesday, we were okay. Now Wednesday night, we're red. So instead of going hybrid, we have to go remote. So all of those things are taxing and time consuming. But for the teachers, again, it was just safety. How do we keep everybody safe so that we don't have outbreaks, we don't have quarantine situations, we don't have a complete shutdown, and we've taken some steps that we think are appropriate, but time will tell.
And just to round that out with the kids, when you talk with the kids, what's their biggest desire? I mean, they miss their friends, I'm sure.
They do. The survey for the students, for the vast majority of kids, want to come back to school. They want to get back into that routine of being around people. They're social animals when they're at the high school level. Not that they're any different at the middle school or the elementary school levels, but we have so many different scenarios that our kids deal with when they're in their shops and when they're in their academic settings, that their big push was what do we have to do to try to get back in, and again, knowing what steps we have to take, it was incredibly important for us to understand their sentiment and understand their want, but also layer in the fact that safety has to come first.
Right.
Graduation is a perfect example.
Yeah.
Our graduating seniors wanted to all be together and have the 2,000 people on the field, and there was no way we could do that.
It's impossible to do.
Same thing with prom. We'll take our chances, and if we get sick, we're not.
You can't do that.
Logistically, as a superintendent and as the administration, as much as we loved our kids, we couldn't put them in that scenario.
But
even
it
if
is
they
so-
signed waivers, because then your conscience comes in and
It's
says,
just
why?
it is so sad though that
Yeah,
they
it's
weren't
hard.
able to
It
have
was
those
hard.
experiences. But that's the reality of what we're dealing with. So I want to change it up just a little bit. We've talked a lot about the plan and how you're keeping kids safe and all of that. We're getting into flu season. We're all cognizant that we will have people who have flu. Maybe we'll have less this year because everyone's wearing masks. We don't know.
Yeah.
Flu and COVID are very difficult to differentiate by presentation. You're going to have kids who are going to come in with flu, and they're going to look like they have COVID. How are you going to deal with sick kids?
So the state has put out a large document that has exact scenarios connected to symptoms. And we've been working with our administration and our nurses. We've developed isolation rooms, again, as part of the guidance. If someone presents as a symptom and they're in school, the classroom teacher knows exactly what they have to do. We have a group of individuals that will respond appropriately gowned to make sure everyone stays as safe as possible. Those students who we think might be symptomatic or might be presenting in a symptomatic manner will go to an isolated part of the building. The nurses have their protocol as far as what they're going to test for, not test for, dealing with symptoms. And there's a checklist where, if you get to a certain criteria, we now say, okay, this is a potential situation. We have to call a parent. The student has to leave. They then have to go through protocol with their doctors, positive test, negative test, how many days, fever-free, such. So there's a checklist and a flow chart that we have to go through for exit and for reentry of student and staff.
Right.
Because both scenarios will play out. So, the nurses have been actively engaged all summer with the administrators, keeping abreast of everything that's coming out as far as guidelines and expectations. They have their groups, the board of school nurses and associations that they're working with to make sure they have a checklist and a flow chart that is appropriate for them. We've been working with DESE and with the public health boards to make sure, as a school scenario, we have our checklists in place. So it's, I think it's going to be like anything else. It's going to be a trial by fire situation where we'll fine tune as we go. We'll probably overreact at the beginning just to be safe, and then as time goes by and when we work out our details and have our plan a little bit crisper, that we'll make some edits and changes as need be. But for the opening of school, we do have a set criteria and checklist that we will use if somebody reports something.
Right. Okay, great. And if all goes well, when do you get to the point where most of the kids are back at school, in school?
So if we followed the traditional track, and again, our plan based on dealing strictly with numbers and safety scenarios, we're thinking that we'll have 350 students, approximately a quarter of our population, in September, October, part of November. Then we'll assess the local information and the data, try to bring in the second half into the shops for December, January. February, April, March, that scenario will look at 75%. If everything goes according to plan, sometime after April vacation, May, we'll bring everybody in. It could go faster, depending on the scenario. It could go slower, depending on the data that comes out. But if we look at it just 10 months, divided by 4, well, now divided by 9.5 months with the start of September 16, approximately, every 2.5-ish months, we'll be looking at the data to see if we can bring in the next layer.
Okay,
Perfect.
great. Perfect.
Dr. Ferrer, in closing, if you had to leave with one message to kind of send out to everybody listening, what would that be?
It would really be to trust. I mean, we're in the profession of doing what's best for kids. So we've taken 6 months to really put actions in place and scenarios in place that are going to keep kids safe. We're not rushing into anything. We're not putting a situation together like other states have done, where open the doors and everything's normal. We know everything's not normal. So to the parents, to the students, to the folks out in the community, trust that the educators and the administrators in any district are doing what is best for the students and for everybody involved, the educators as well, and the staff members that are coming out. We're not looking to put anybody in harm's way just because we've been told if you don't do X, you might lose some funding. We're going to do what's appropriate and deal with the circumstances afterwards.
And I will add, I have read the plan, and it is an excellent plan. It's very comprehensive. It's well thought out. So for what it's worth, from a medical perspective, it makes sense. So I want to thank you very much for participating and being part of our podcast. I think that the message that you've delivered is really important, and the information that you delivered is really crucial. I'm sure there's a lot of listeners who really benefited from this. So thank you once again.
Oh, anytime. I thank you for having me. And if the parents out there, if they have questions, I hope they feel comfortable enough to call or email or communicate with the school, and we'll do the best we can as far as getting information out to folks.
Perfect.
Thank you.
So much.
No problem. Thank you.
We are off.